Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us on this, what was a beautiful day. I hope everyone was able to get a little bit of time outside on our first real, I guess, almost spring day. My name is Matt Gagel. I am the Director of Programs here at Montgomery History. Thanks for joining us for this very special history conversation and lecture in partnership with the Glen Echo Park Partnership for Arts and Culture. Before we get started, I'm going to go over a few really quick announcements. And then we'll jump right into things. As I mentioned, my name is Matt Gagel. I am Director of Programs at Montgomery History. For those of you who have not joined us before, we do host a weekly lecture series, usually on Tuesday afternoons. We do also post recordings of those on the Monday afterwards. We present different presentations on local and county history, sometimes branching out a little bit. Those usually run about 40 minutes to an hour. Every Tuesday, almost every Tuesday at 2 p.m. We also partner with Montgomery County Public Schools for National History Day, which is a competition for middle school students and some high school students to get them interested in history, especially local history. And each year there's a competition, and we need judges to help judge that competition. You do not need to be an expert in history. You just have to have a desire to help students increase their interest in history. We do provide training on that, and it's all done online this year, so it's very easy, and you've got quite a few days to work on it, over a week. If you would like to learn a little bit more about that, you can visit our website at montgomeryhistory.org/HD-2021, HD 2021. And you can register there. We definitely need more judges, and we'll take as many as can help, and that helps lighten the load for all the other judges and helps make the entire program a great opportunity for students. Next week, we will be having a history conversation rewind as we prepare for the History Day, which we'll be posting a recording on our website of a previous history conversation dealing with farmerettes and suffragettes on the home front in World War I. This was actually recorded at a previous history conference. It's a fantastic presentation. I know you'll enjoy it, and I think it should be great. A couple other things, and then I will finish talking. This is a four-part lecture series. We will have 3 other lectures after tonight. April 14th, we'll have a presentation on the history of carousels. July 14th, it'll be the Glen Echo Park's Wurlitzer Band Organ, a 50-year perspective. And then August 11th will be the painting style of the Dentzel Carousel Company and the restoration techniques that were done to restore the carousel. Each one of those will be on a Wednesday at 7:30. So please feel free to join us. And you can certainly find out more information about that at the Glen Echo Park website, and I'm going to put that link in the chat so you'll be able to see that. And then throughout the presentation, if you have any questions, I recommend that you use the Q&A function. Those will come to me, and then at the end of the presentation, we will try to get to as many of those as we can. We don't want to be here all night, but we'll do our best to answer as many as possible. All right, that's enough from me. With that, I'd like to introduce Katie Berner, who is the Executive Director at the Glen Echo Park Partnership for Arts and Culture.
Great. Thank you, Matt. Hi, I'm Katie Berner, and I'm the Director at Glen Echo Park of the management entity Glen Echo Park Partnership, and together with Montgomery County and the National Park Service, we manage the park and its programs. Welcome to the first in our series of virtual lectures for the centennial anniversary of the Dentzel Carousel at Glen Echo Park. And we're starting with this really interesting topic during Black History Month. Last week marked the beginning of our events and activities for this anniversary year, which has been difficult during a pandemic. I know people are wondering if the carousel is going to be open, and we think that it probably will with certain guidance and procedures, and we'll keep everyone informed about that. We're really pleased to be partnering with Montgomery History tonight, who are experts in telling the stories of our county, and I'm really grateful for their involvement. It's just added so much, and we've reached a larger audience because of it, so thanks. Also, we have some wonderful funders I'll thank quickly, in particular the state of Maryland through the Maryland Heritage Areas Authority and the Maryland State Arts Council, who through their Maryland Traditions program have awarded the carousel with the 2021 Heritage Award in the Place category. And they are helping to fund some of these activities that you'll see over the next few months. We also thank Heritage Montgomery and Carol Trawick, Montgomery County, and the National Park Service for their support. To match this wonderful grant funding, we hope you will consider a donation. And if you care to make a donation, there's a link in the chat to our website, which will help to match some of these grant funds. I also know that our two partners tonight would love to see funding as well. So if you're so inclined, you can support the film directly. You can also support our partner, Montgomery History. So lots of options there. Our next lecture in the series, as Matt mentioned, will take place on April 14th. It's going to feature Barbara Fa Charles of the National Carousel Association discussing the history of carousels. And she really knows her stuff, so I encourage you to come to that one. You can find all the information you need at the link that Matt has put up about our 100-year anniversary activities, glenechopark.org/carousel100. The carousel was first installed in 1921, just to give you a little bit of background before we dive into the protest era. The park was owned privately as an amusement park for a number of years, beginning in the 1890s, and it closed in 1968, after which it entered the public realm as a property of the National Park Service. The community actually saved the carousel and ensured that it wasn't moved by raising funds to purchase it back from someone who had actually purchased the carousel and was going to move it to California. So we're really lucky we even have the carousel. We at the park are committed to telling important stories of our history, such as this one tonight. The park is an arts center, it's an arts and cultural center, but it's also an important piece of our history, and it's a historic site and a historic district. Also, it sits on the Potomac River, is property that is environmentally fragile and important as well. Anyway, I'm really looking forward to hearing more about this story tonight, because for the first 40 years of the carousel's history, it was operated as a segregated amusement ride. And the intricate story of how that came to an end is the subject of an upcoming film being produced by our speaker this evening. So tonight we'll hear from Ilana Trachtman, who is an award-winning producer and director. She directed for PBS the independent feature Mariachi High, Black in Latin America, hosted by Henry Louis Gates, and Texas Ranch House. And she's also produced shows for History Detectives and Reading Rainbow. Through her production company, Ruby Pictures, Ilana made the feature Praying with Lior, which garnered multiple awards. Most recently, Ilana produced and directed The Pursuit, 50 Years in the Fight for LGBT Rights for WHYY, which won the Mid-Atlantic Emmy for Best Documentary. Tonight, she's going to explore the Glen Echo Park Carousel civil rights story and discuss her documentary in progress, Ain't No Back to a Merry-Go-Round. So at this point, I'll hand it over to our wonderful speaker, Ilana.
Thanks, Katie, and thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate the partnership and Montgomery History's help. They've actually been enormously supportive of this film and this project, which is almost 7 years in the making. And tonight I'm going to be talking to you about the film and also about the carousel specifically. But before I start really kind of zeroing in on the carousel, I want to just give you an overview of the film. This is a 5-minute sample. Can everyone see that?
It should be visible. It's a little low resolution, but
that part, that's a blur. That's a blur. Okay.
Washington, D.C., the capital of America, the country that stands for justice, equality. And here it is, right outside of this capital. You've got this great hypocrisy.
baby sister always wanted to ride on the roller coaster. And she didn't understand why she couldn't ride the roller coaster. We'd get on the trolley and we would ride out here and we just press our nose against the glass, watch all the kids having a great time, and go right on back down. Fun is where you find it. Where do you find it? Glen Echo Amusement.
What's on your fun calendar this weekend? How about taking a spin toward fabulous Glen Echo Amusement Park?
We were not very popular in our household because we wouldn't let our kids come here because they were not looking for all the customers. They were looking for the white customers.
Then come February 1, and the news is about the 4 students from Greensboro. That was it. At Howard, we had formed a nonviolent action group, NAG, NAG, and we said we're going to nag the establishment.
There was word the Howard University students were going to set up a picket line. We had one day to alert one another in Bannockburn. And so we were down here with our lemonade and cookies.
It was the first time that I had seen an organized activity that was integrated.
I've never encountered a situation like that before, or worked that closely with whites before.
It felt like the whole community was involved.
Most of the kids that came from the cul-de-sac of the neighborhood where I was from, they marched.
I remember these 2 individuals showing me the number of tattoos. They had just 15 years prior to that got out of Auschwitz. I asked why. They just said nobody was there to protest for what was happening to Jews, and they just want to make sure that this type of thing never happened again.
Simple moral justice will come to Glen Echo too. Glen Echo off limits for democracy.
We had all kinds of songs. Taking the bus to Jackson this time. I'm riding that front seat, I'll do it every time. Hallelujah, I'm a traveling, hallelujah, ain't it fine? Hallelujah, I'm a traveling down freedom's main line.
Whoa, come on round to the front of the bus. I'll be riding up there.
I was told we were all going to the carousel. We sat and everything stopped. And after a while, the police came and they arrested the black males first.
White or colored? Am I white or colored? That's correct. That's what I want to know. Ask your race. By race, I belong to the human race. All right. This park is segregated. You told me because my skin is black, I cannot come into your park? Well, not because your skin is black. I asked you what your race was. What class of persons do you allow to come in here? White people. White people. So you're saying that you exclude the American Negro who is a citizen of the United States? That's right.
One night there was a shot. We didn't know whether that was going to be repeated.
When the Nazi party appeared on the other side of the road to counter-picket us, I left my children home that day.
Just as I'm coming around by the carousel, this man spits on me. And we were taught not to react to that kind of behavior. And so it literally rolled down the side of my face onto the collar of my Peter Pan blouse. Didn't try to wipe it off, didn't try to fix it or anything. I'm thinking, he's an adult and I'm a child. How much hatred is there?
We weren't arrested, and they were arrested. They weren't allowed to come in. We were allowed to come in, so we had a position of privilege that they didn't have. And they got a lot of really rough treatment.
Had it not been for the Jewish community and some of the white community, I don't know how we would have successfully integrated.
Had it not been for this experience, I don't know that I would have gone on the Freedom Ride.
It's meant for the rest of my life. I want to be a witness. I've learned that having your body there makes a difference.
I think it was Shakespeare's The Tempest that says, what is past is prologue. And what bothers me more than anything else, almost anyone under 30 doesn't have any knowledge of the sit-ins and what life used to be. And they think how things are now is the way they always were.
Grace will be more.
So I'm going to talk about the carousel's important role in all of this specifically. But before I do that, I feel compelled as a filmmaker to offer a few caveats. What you're going to see are several clips over the course of the evening. That, what we just watched, is the longest clip that you're going to see, but nothing that we will see is finished. So that means there is not final video or final audio. The colors aren't right. The resolution isn't right. And it's a little bit nauseating for me to share this, but I actually think that the content is really important and I want you to see it. So I just need to put that out there. I love the Dentzel Carousel. I have loved it since 1979 when my family moved to the area. But I have to say that today, the reason that I love the carousel the most is because it was the site of perhaps one of the most creative sit-in locations during the civil rights movement. And it was the kickoff event that started the entire summer of protest, because up until that point in time, and actually it took another year beyond that, Glen Echo Amusement Park's 51-year-old history was entirely whites only. I actually think it's important to repeat that because it's very hard to fathom that the park, which was really the beloved recreation destination of all metropolitan Washington area, was actually all white metropolitan area. And none of those rides, the ballroom, the crystal pool, the carousel were available, were used at all by anybody who was non-white. And I think you have to keep in mind that there were many small Black communities in Montgomery County at that time. Some of them had been there since slavery. There was actually one that was about 1.5 miles down the road, Carver Road, and people could see the roller coaster and the swimming pool from the road. You could hear and smell the park. So you have kids in the summertime who can see the swimming pool that they can't enter. The ballroom performances were regularly broadcast on WMAL radio, but of course you couldn't go if you weren't white. So I know all the facts and I've been immersed in this story for 6 years, but I still find it really hard to fully grasp what it would have been like to be a Black child who could see the park but who couldn't enter it. So I think this poem by Langston Hughes gives a better sense of what it meant, and it also gives the film its name. Hang on, I need to share screen again. Wait a second. That works.
It hasn't started sharing yet, but.
Do you see a black screen?
I just see you at the moment.
Oh, thank you for telling me that. Okay.
There we go.
Okay. Oh, why does that? Okay. Now you see a black screen?
Correct.
Okay.
Where is the Jim Crow section on this merry-go-round, mister? 'Cause I want to ride. Down south where I come from, white and colored can't sit side by side. Down south on the train, there's a Jim Crow car. On the bus, we're put in the back. But there ain't no back to a merry-go-round. Where's a horse for a kid that's black?
Now I want to point out something that's that's important to know and totally bizarre, is that there was one exception to this rule about the parks being whites only. Brown-skinned diplomats from other countries were allowed to use the park, but not brown-skinned Americans. African Americans couldn't use the park. Africans could use the park. And there's actually, I'm going to show you, this is a little piece in the film. It's footage of Sukarno, who was the leader of Indonesia. He was visiting Eisenhower, and the Nixon girls brought Sukarno's young son to Glen Echo Park, which made quite a splash in the newspapers.
Yep.
Do you see the spinning wheel?
I just see that you have started sharing, so we'll give it a second here.
All right. I have that spinning,
technology.
horrible spinning beach ball right now.
Let me see if I can help here with this. Now, if I do this, let's see if that. Oh, see, you have frozen. Uh-oh. Okay, let's see if we can get this figured out here. It does show that you've frozen. Let me see if I can stop your sharing again.
I'm gonna leave and come back in, okay?
Okay, I apologize, everyone. We're having a little bit of a technical issue here, but we'll get this fixed in just a moment, as soon as Ilana gets back. And again, as I mentioned at the beginning, we will be doing several more of these programs throughout the year, and we'll be having our next one in April. And I think we're back.
Yeah, you can see me again?
I can see you again, okay.
Okay, good. Okay, let's try sharing the screen again. And
okay. I don't see anything yet.
Okay, let's see. Do you see my screen now?
I still only see you at the moment.
Okay. How about now?
Still you. Oh, I think we're getting something here.
Okay, do you
there
see?
we go. Yep, we're in business.
So where I left off was I was talking about this interesting hypocrisy of that diplomats who were of darker skin were actually allowed to go to Glen Echo if they were not American. Here's just a little piece. There's no sound to this, actually. But there is Sukarno's son enjoying the rides. On the carousel, in fact. And there he is with the Nixon girls, Trish and Julie. So it was quite a big deal. So what happened the summer of 1960? There was a confluence of events that led Glen Echo to be the site of one of the Maryland, DC, Montgomery County area's first protests against segregation, and generally, probably, according to my history advisors, the first sustained, intentional, interracial protest in the country against segregation. Because it was from its inception, this protest was integrated. Now, in the Black community, there is, in 1960, there's a new generation of people coming of age who have been shaped by the murder of Emmett Till and the Montgomery bus boycott of 1955, and inspired by the speeches of an up-and-coming Dr. Martin Luther King. And they have a different take on the speed with which they want equality to happen. They're frustrated with their parents working through legal means, and they want to do something different. And so when on February 1st, 1960, 4 students from North Carolina A&T sat down at the lunch counter at Greensboro and refused to get up when they were refused service, that event, that single event was like the firecracker, the fireworks that Black students all over the country, especially at the historically Black colleges and universities in the South, saw those fireworks and took it as their cue. And over the next few months, you have sit-ins happening all over the South. Some of them start out as sympathy pickets that are also taking place at Woolworths, like the Greensboro counter, and some of them are just people looking for anywhere that they can demand change and hold some kind of a sit-in. And on Howard University's campus, Howard in DC, of course, a few students took notice. They did not start at Glen Echo. They actually started, this is a detail which I discovered recently and find incredibly interesting, by protesting at the Capitol in the Rotunda. They actually were protesting for a civil rights bill, which, as you know, wouldn't really come until 1964. And largely, unlike our recent protest in the Capitol Rotunda, they were singing and praying. Later on in June, this group of students, who by now were calling themselves NAG, the Nonviolent Action Group, wanted to do something more hands-on. They wanted to get a reaction, which they wouldn't get just by showing up at the Capitol. And so they were looking to do their own sit-ins. Now, Washington, D.C., where they went to school, had outlawed segregation. Although, if you ask anybody who's African-American and in DC at the time, there was de facto segregation in Washington, meaning you could enter a restaurant, but you wouldn't necessarily get served. You could go shopping in a department store, but you wouldn't necessarily be allowed to use the dressing room. But in terms of looking for legal targets, they had to take their activities elsewhere, and they went across the river to Arlington, Virginia. They went to the segregated lunch counters of Arlington, Virginia. It was about 12 of them at first, and they would split into two groups, 6 and 6, and sat down at the lunch counters. The first one was the drug fair. Now, they got a lot of press, partially because they got so much unwanted attention. Because, and it's not clear to me if they knew this at the time, Arlington was the headquarters for George Lincoln Rockwell's American Nazi Party. And they ended up, I'm making a long story short, having a huge amount of success. In less than 2 weeks, all of the lunch counters in Arlington capitulated, partially because of all of the press and partially because many of the lunch counters were franchises that had partners up north, like Woolworths. And those partners depended on Black customers. And so rather than hurt their partners, they decided to integrate. So these kids are on a high from this victory, which was fairly easily earned, and they were looking for another target. And Glen Echo Amusement Park was hard to miss. Screen again.
Yep, and it looks like it's working. I say that. Yep, okay, we're good.
Where you find it? Where do you find it? Glen Echo Amusement Park. Come on out to Glen Echo Amusement Park today. It's now open for another fantabulous season of exciting rides and family fun. So come join in the fun. Now open for another fun-filled season.
Now, I have to say, I've been listening to a lot of tapes of old radio, and that ad, or a variation on that ad, plays 2 times an hour. So you can imagine how pervasive this is. I mean, this is like everybody knows about this place, but of course, everybody also knows that only some people's money is welcome. Now, I just want to back up a bit. If you remember, I said that there was a perfect storm of events which led to the protest the summer of 1960. In the 1940s, there were a group of people, mostly young married couples and young families, who moved to Washington in order to work in the New Deal administration or in the labor unions. And many of them were Jewish, and there were housing covenants in many areas in Washington, D.C. that prevented selling to Jews. So this group worked together to build a cooperative community. It's called Bannockburn, and it happened to be more or less across the street from Glen Echo. And I think that it's hard also for us to grasp what a cooperative community would have meant in that time, because you have to remember there were also only a few years after the really punishing McCarthy years, and anything that smacked of cooperative, was socialistic and potentially communistic. So even choosing to do this was pretty daring to begin with. So I want you to just have a little bit of background about Bannockburn.
Okay. Yep.
Hopefully I'm sharing my screen.
It looks like it started. There we go. Yep.
Bannockburn had been planned during the war. It was founded with the philosophy of a co-op. A lot of the real estate around here couldn't be sold to Catholics or Jews. I mean, there was restrictive covenants all over the place. So Bannockburn really was a haven for many of these families.
They had to be pretty special and more civic-minded than your average person to pick a housing cooperative. So there were a lot of Roosevelt New Deal appointees, a lot of federal government workers. I would say a third of the community was Jewish and either had family members who were killed or were recent immigrants to this country from World War II.
When we moved in, we were said, well, do you really want to live in Bannockburn? You know, it's mostly Jewish. And our response was, their values are our values. The name Bannockburn suggested radical people lived there. And co-op in those days even had an aspect of lefties.
The notion of the co-op movement, the way it played out in Bannockburn, was the antithesis of what was happening in Levittown. The only thing I can analogize it to is like a kibbutz. I think my parents, compared to many other people, were radical because they were joining a community. It was based on the notion of co-op. And my parents embraced that. My parents were avid supporters of the cooperative nursery school, avid supporters of the cooperative babysitting club. In the early years, they had one tool shed, 4 houses on the circle. It had one lawnmower, and they took turns using the lawnmower.
On New Year's Eve, everyone wanted to go out, so who was that going to leave to babysit? Because everybody was in the same babysitting co-op. So the decision was to have a joint New Year's Eve party, and everybody's keys were put into a container near the front door, and every half hour, one parent set out and visited each house, and then came back to the party, and then no single parent missed more than about a half hour of the festivity. And all those kids were left alone. Just think about what they were doing was radical in their day, and in our day, it would be considered so radical they'd all be arrested. We were outside, we were at the creek, we were on the playground. While we were growing up, if anyone had walked down the street and tripped and skinned their knee, you could go up to any house, ring the doorbell, and somebody would give you first aid and let you use a phone or whatever you needed.
I knew every member in every house. I knew what ages their kids were. We would sort of live at each other's houses.
I remember the very first day I was in Bannockburn. I was 8. There was a huge game of Red Rover send so-and-so right over. And so I just went on up and started in the game and became part of the community and came home and said, oh, I know the kids here. The unifying factor, I think, was union, but also government, also Jewish, also civil rights sorts, and also very highly educated. So all of those factors were at play, and many people shared 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 traits of those.
It was the co-op ideal the caring community. And what I want for my family, you want for yours, so together we build it. And then politically we get together and we do things, whether it's at the PTA or the Civic Association or taking the message to Montgomery County and helping get a law passed.
If we had moved into any other suburban neighborhood in Maryland, I would not have been introduced to this idea of political activism. It was definitely different that way.
Sorry about that. So, like I said, perfect storm. So when you have these Howard University students who are radicalized, and here they find kind of the perfect partner in the neighborhood that's across the street. So when they planned to picket Howard, to picket Glen Echo, they reached out to their allies in the labor movement, because at that point, the CIO unions were very focused on integration. And the labor people told them about this neighborhood, by the way, that's across the street from where you want to go. And they gave them a few names of people to call, and they made those phone calls. And then sure enough, Bannockburn's phone tree kicked off. And, you know, actually have a copy of the phone tree. I should have brought it, but you see like a last name, and then you see 3 and then a dash and then 4 numbers, you know, because everyone's number was only 5 numbers long. And they called each other so that the next day, when the students from NAG showed up, they were met by between 20 and 30 families, Bannockburn families, who were there with lemonade and cookies and union-made picket signs. On the first day of the protest, the picket line was set up. And because they were savvy, both the students and these professional union organizers, they knew that they needed to follow a sit-in, and they were sure to invite the press. So they were stopped at the gate. The Black students were stopped at the gate. And while some of them were being stopped, others headed right for our Dentzel Carousel. Try this again. See it?
Okay, yep.
Here we go.
I believe the first protest here at Glen Echo was the arrest on the merry-go-round. Entrance into the park was free, but you had to have a ticket to go on a ride. So one of the white members of the group went and got tickets. And before anybody could stop them, they just got on the merry-go-round. I remember hearing bells ringing.
By race, I belong to the human race. All right. This park is segregated. I don't understand what you mean. Well, it's strictly for white people. Strictly for white persons? Mm-hmm. It has been for years. You told me because my skin is black, I cannot come into your park? Well, not because your skin is black. Well, I asked you what your race was. What class of persons do you allow to come in here? White people. White people. So you're saying that you exclude the American Negro? That's right. Park is segregated. Who is the American Negro? Who is a citizen of the United States? That's right.
Police came. He basically said, well, if you continue to sit here, I'm going to take you to jail. And he did. Bang, they closed the door. That was when the realization that it wasn't going to be a walk in the park.
So that was how it started. It was a watershed for the Washington area. First, to see pickets at all. Second, to see Blacks and whites working together, because the world was so segregated at that point that you just didn't see those kinds of images. And then also for the sit-in to be on the carousel, and it really kind of like flew in the face of everything. It wasn't things that people accepted as controversial, like swimming pools or dining establishments, but it was actually a merry-go-round. And I'll come back to that, but I want to say more about the pickets that summer. They went on every single day for 11 weeks. They started every afternoon at 3 p.m. and they went till 11 p.m. during the week and midnight on the weekends. And anyone who entered the park had to cross a picket line, both at the main gate and also at the parking lot. Now, I'm sure that there are many people on this call like me who have put in time at rallies and marches and maybe even carried signs, but I don't know how many of us can say that we picketed on consecutive days, let alone for 11 weeks during a 90-degree summer. And there were shifts, of course. Families were generally taking the 3 o'clock until dinner time, and then the students were coming later. But there was certainly a lot of overlap, and most people who picketed were picketing every day. There was also Nazis. The American Nazi Party, the people that had come out in Arlington, for the first time came out into broad daylight to do real counter protesting, identifying as Nazis, wearing swastika armbands. And of course, that was great for the press, and it was great for their cause, because here you are just 15 years after the liberation of Auschwitz, and there's a line now in the sand, like whose line are you on? Whose side are you on? Are you going to be on the side of the Nazis, or are you going to be on the side of righteousness? And being forced to choose sides, interestingly, on the same side as the Nazis were the owners of Glen Echo Amusement Park. At that time were Samuel and Abraham Baker, who were two Jewish brothers. I believe that social history was changed because of what happened on that picket line. First of all, you had young people, the Howard students and the African-American neighbors that joined them, as well as white high school students from Montgomery County high schools, and also kids who were growing up in Bannockburn and who were away at college but had come back for the summer. And these two groups, Black and white, were mingling for the first time. And so not only did people get to know each other, there was partying and there was dating. And as a matter of fact, 3 marriages came out of the Glen Echo picket line. And young people, especially white people who had not been exposed to the evil of segregation, of what it really meant, because it hadn't really been in their face, they got educated. And when they went back to their college campuses or their high schools in the fall, they were radicalized and they were bringing the message of the movement. And the people who went forth were spreading this message of interracial cooperation, and it caught on. And the ripples from this basically small protest about the local carousel, the local amusement park, were profound. From my count, 10 of the young people on the picket line joined the 10 of the people who were on the Glen Echo picket line joined the Freedom Rides in 1961, which made a huge statement in this country. One of them, by the way, was a young Stokely Carmichael. Glen Echo was his first picket line. And because of his involvement that summer, when he started Howard in the fall as a freshman, he was already an indoctrinated activist who had street cred. And even those people who didn't join the Freedom Rides or become SNCC field secretaries, and there were many SNCC field secretaries from that line, they remember, let me back up. I think you have to consider that most civil rights activity, contrary to kind of like the big splashy pictures that we see and learn about in school, most activity was local and small, and it was taken up by regular people. And most of the people who I've talked to, who participated, and I've talked to about 150 people by now who were there either, in strollers or walking, point to this moment of standing up as transformative, because it was so anathema. It was so unusual, because really 1960 is much more like the 50s than the 60s. It just wasn't something that people were doing. And so by choosing to, in that moment, they were marking themselves as different than anyone around them. And they were marking themselves as somebody who is willing to commit bodily to work for change. Okay, there's lots more to talk about, of course, but I really want you to see the movie when it's finished. So I'm going to leave you with one more thing that I think is pretty extraordinary. The case of the 5 students whose names are, let me get them all, Gwendolyn Green, Lawrence Henry, Cecil Washington, Marvis Saunders, and Bill Griffin. Of all of those people, 2 of them are still alive. That case went through the Maryland courts and went all the way to the Supreme Court, to the US Supreme Court. And there's some interesting details about the case that made it kind of the perfect test case for CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, and the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. The basic issue at Glen Echo was that it advertised to the public. So as such, it was a public accommodation. There wasn't a public accommodation law in Montgomery County, and there wasn't in the country. Some counties, some states had them, but Maryland did not. But there was a law against state-sponsored segregation. So Glen Echo Amusement Park, of course, didn't have its own police force. It had its private security company. And the head of security, Francis Collins, that's who you heard talking in the clip, was deputized as a sheriff. So I'm just going to play a bit of this. I have to admit, I just found this recording of famous civil rights lawyer Joseph Rao's opening arguments in this case, and it hasn't been edited at all for the film. We just dropped in a few images today, basically so you wouldn't have to look at me the whole time that you listen to it. Okay, here we go. Share screen.
And it looks like it's working, so.
Okay, good. Again, not at all edited.
William L. Griffin et al. Petitioners versus Maryland. Mr. Rao, you may proceed with your argument.
May it please the court, the facts are simple and largely undisputed. On January 30, 1960, a number of persons, Negro and white, including the 5 petitioners here, gathered outside of Glen Echo Amusement Park, the major amusement park serving the District of Columbia. A picket line protesting the assumed position of the park of segregation was set up. And shortly thereafter, about 8:15 in the evening, the 5 petitioners, young Negroes, went into the park. They went onto the carousel and took their places on the horses and other animals there. And they had tickets purchased by a white friend, and it is not contested that the tickets were freely transferable. But they didn't ride. The carousel didn't move, and a man named Francis J. Collins walked up to them. He had on the uniform of the National Detective Agency, a private detective agency, and he was employed by the park through a contract with the National Detective Agency. He had on the badge of Deputy Sheriff of the state of Maryland. There was testimony of Lieutenant Collins that he went to the owner, Mr. Baker, and said, "These 5 Negroes are on there. What shall I do?" And he said, "Arrest them." Collins testified it was the policy to keep them off solely because they were Negroes. And the arrest was to be made by Lieutenant Collins solely because they were Negroes, and Lieutenant Collins made the arrest solely because. Now, if your honors please, these convictions must be reversed under the 14th Amendment.
What constitutional provision do you rest on to draw that distinction?
I respectfully suggest that the Equal Protection Clause prevents a state from creating or recognizing a private right to discriminate. I have the biggest place of public accommodation probably in this whole big metropolitan area where thousands of people are attracted daily, and of course that supports the size and the place and the licensing and the regulation and the support of this place by the government all adds to it. Discrimination at a public accommodation is a badge of humiliation and inferiority. Clearly as such, it's a leftover part of slavery, and clearly as such, I could have raised it under the 13th Amendment. It is also invalidated by the 14th Amendment. Now, if your honors, please, I do most seriously challenge that there is any private right to discriminate at a place of public accommodation.
So I'm gonna leave it there, and I will happily answer any questions that you have. But I do want to say that the next time that you visit our Dentzel Carousel, the next time that you ride or that you take your children or your grandchildren to ride, I want you to think about the freedom that we all have to do that, and the tremendous debt that we owe to these pretty ordinary heroes who stood up and fought for it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ilana. That was fantastic. I'm going to go ahead and get started with the questions. There are a lot of them. I will try and get to as many as we can, but we don't want to keep people here too late. The first one that I'm seeing a lot of is people want to know when the documentary will be available.
Thank you. I love that question. I am hoping that the film will be ready for festivals and have a sort of a festival life first in June. But we're actively racing to the finish line right now. And we're also still actively fundraising for outreach, because when the film is finished, it's really important to me that it be seen by people in schools, and that it get to the Montgomery County Board of Education and Maryland State Board of Education, and that it be something that be used as a tool for teaching about civil rights and also about the impulse to activism.
Okay. Someone asks, says, did you say earlier that the two owners of Glen Echo Park were Jewish? Do we know how they justified the segregation? And how was that, how did they, was there tension between the community, the Jewish community, and the park owners?
So the park owners' names were Samuel and Abraham Baker, and yes, they were Jewish. They were from Miami, although I think that they must have had some kind of residence in the area. And they are shockingly, surprisingly silent during this entire episode. In fact, you know, as you can see from just the clips that you've seen tonight, like I have thousands and thousands of images of the park, and I have yet to find one that has the Bakers in it. They were just incredibly anonymous. And throughout the summer of these protests, they had different people who were kind of like their liaisons to the community. There was a park manager whose name was Leonard Warnoff, and he was really the only person that was a visible presence in the park. And so whenever they were asked for comment by the press, they didn't speak. A few times the park manager said that the park owners are going to make a statement, and then they would decide that they weren't going to make a statement. And in fact, on some of the days of the pickets, because of the tremendous connections that people in Bannockburn had, congressmen came to the park, and eventually A. Philip Randolph and Roy Wilkins picketed, and every time sort of asking to negotiate with the park. And at one point, the congressman spoke to Warnoff, and Warnoff announced, okay, you know, they'll meet with you. And the next day on the cover of the Washington Afro-American is its huge front page headline that says, "Congressman get the pledge." And the day after that, the park announces, actually, they're not going to talk to you because there's a pending court case. And so this case of the students on the carousel was always used as the excuse for why the park owners never talked. And I have no idea what they thought. I've tried to track them down. To this day, I have no idea, but I can tell you that 10 years after all of this, they purchased an amusement park in Flemington, New Jersey. And that park had never been segregated, was fully integrated. And, you know, it didn't seem to be an issue.
Okay. I'm going to kind of steer the question a little bit. A lot of people are asking where they can go to find out more about the documentary, and where they can make a donation. So if you want to answer that, and I will do my part once you
Thank you. Thank you. So if you would like to be notified when there are screenings and when there'll be a DVD and things like that, you can join on our Facebook page. And I know that Matt's putting that address up in the chat, but it's the Glen Echo Documentary Project is the Facebook page. And then if you would like to make a donation, all of the donations are tax deductible and incredibly, incredibly helpful. As you can see, we're a teeny operation. They are through Washington Area Women in Film and Video, and that is wife.org/donate. And then you can choose to donate to Ain't No Back to a Merry-Go-Round.
Okay, and Ilana, I'll let you know that there is one of the MCPS curriculum writers is currently watching, and she mentions that she created a whole lesson for the 9th grade students using the campaign to integrate Glen Echo. And she says it's going to be used this April, and she featured the film trailer. So I will actually get you into, I'll connect you with her. I'm sure she would be really excited to get in touch with you about that.
That's exciting, thank you.
And again, we got a lot of questions. I will try to get to as many. Someone says, what groups organized the counter protests? The KKK, the White Citizens Council?
So I don't have evidence of any actual organization beyond like the American Nazi Party. But even when the American Nazi Party was counter protesting, there were other people who seem to have come on their own. There may have been organizations behind it, but I haven't found anything to support that. I know that there was a KKK in Montgomery County, but there certainly wasn't people protesting that were counter protesting that were identifying themselves as KKK organizers. But if anyone has any information, I'd be really interested to find out about that. I mean, when I've seen the pictures, it's always kind of like the same faces. It's youngish white people, and I've actually had someone who is a scholar of the American Nazi Party identify many of the people who were American Nazi Party participants and kind of tell me their backstories, and they're all just as screwed up and deranged as you would expect.
Okay. Next question that's related. Among the counter protesters was the American Nazi Party. Did its involvement create any backlash in favor of the protesters?
Definitely, yeah, and that's what I said. I do think that, first of all, they got a lot of press, more press than they probably would have, because the American Nazi Party was newsworthy. And I think that when people read about it, they joined on the side of the protesters. I also think that the park lost a lot of business because people didn't want to cross that picket line and be seen as supporting the Nazis. But at the same time, plenty of people went to the park that summer. Plenty of people did cross that picket line. And when you think about the size of Montgomery County, and at most the picket line had 100, 150 people on it at a time, that's a lot of people who stayed home.
Okay. Let's see. Did any children participate in the protests?
Yeah, that's a great question. So lots of children participated in the protests, partially because it was summer and there was nothing else for them to do. So, staying home would have meant that their parents had to get a babysitter. So, you see all kinds of pictures of people pushing strollers and lots of kids. And I think that, for some kids, it was actually fun for the first few minutes. And then it got really boring because it was very hot. And all they were doing was walking, back and forth and doing some singing. But there were plenty of neighborhood kids, white kids and Black kids from Carver Road and River Road and Poolsville and some of the other neighboring African-American communities.
Okay, someone's recounting her experience. She actually says, I remember swimming in the pool and knowing or hearing brown-skinned people were not allowed. I was 6 and white. I had no idea as a child how wrong this was. So she says, thanks for bringing it up. Thank you for that comment there, Mary. Let's see here. So someone says, white people objected to integrated swimming much more firmly than other kinds of segregation. Do you think the objections would have been less fervent if the Crystal Plunge wasn't at the park? Have you looked at local amusement parks in other places?
Yeah, I mean, this story is a story that repeats all over the country about amusement parks and segregated recreation. And in fact, there was something not exactly similar because the forces weren't quite similar, but it also happened at Glen Oaks Amusement Park in Baltimore in 1963. So what's interesting about this story is that it was so early in the civil rights movement for people to become activated and to get involved in such a committed way. You know, it's 3 years before the March on Washington. In terms of the pool issue, for sure, the pool issue is a big part of it. And I have editorials, the most offensive editorials appeared in the Bethesda Chevy Chase Tribune. And I have editorials talking about, you know, how amoral and against God it is for Negro children to be swimming in the same pool as white children. That's their words. But that said, if you look at the signs by the counter protesters, they're referring to all of the activities of Glen Echo. You know, do you want horrible epithet for Black people? Do you want them with you in the tunnel of love? Do you want to be sitting with them on the cuddle up? So I think the whole concept of interracial recreation was difficult for people. And I do have to say, which you'll find out if you watch the film, but when the park was integrated the following year in 1961, the park was integrated, and it was integrated without incident, including the swimming pool, for the next 7 years until 1968.
Okay. Someone asks, you use the term radicalized. That tends to have a negative connotation. What is your, I don't want to say reasoning, but did you use that term on purpose, especially when is it because it was used at the time? What was your reasoning behind that?
Thank you. That's actually a really smart question. And I probably was too glib in using the word radicalized, especially because of what radical meant then versus what it means today. They certainly would have never defined themselves as radicalized. But what I did mean is that they, I guess in today's parlance, we would say they became woke. And people who had never had any political consciousness whatsoever, certainly no sense that they had a part to play in social change, became lifelong social activists, social justice warriors, I would say. So that's what I meant, and I should be careful about that. So thank you.
Okay. Let's see here. What was the outcome of that Supreme Court case that you played?
Yeah, so the Supreme Court were a bunch of wimps, I will say. The case was first brought to them in 1961. They didn't hear it. They heard it for the first time in 1962. What we played was the re-argument in 1963, because in 1962 they punted and said they're not gonna settle any sit-in cases. In 1963 they did the same thing, and in 1964, when there was word that the Civil Rights Bill was going to be passed, essentially making all the cases irrelevant, shortly before that, the Supreme Court the Supreme Court decided in favor of the students and wiped off the arrests. And then soon after that, Kennedy signed the Civil Rights Bill, and there was no such thing as discrimination in public accommodations.
Okay, let's see here. It says, in your research, do you see any news about what was happening in Rockville around the same time? Picketing of the Highboy restaurant, and was the NAACP involved in Glen Echo at this time?
Thanks, those are great questions. Yes. So during that same summer, the students from NAG were also sort of, once Glen Echo was established as a picketing location, they kind of spread out. They were also involved with picketing the Highboy restaurant and the Heiser Theater, and eventually a few bowling alleys, but that was sort of more to the fall. And you know, they all had different results. The Highboy was a new restaurant, and it was particularly offensive because they had put ads, you know, under people's doors, including in the Black communities, inviting people to come to this new opening restaurant. And then the restaurant opens and they don't serve Black people. And as a result of what was going on at Glen Echo, in July, Montgomery County created an interracial commission to study this issue of segregation in public accommodations. And the interracial commission, of course, recommended that it not be allowed. The mayor of Rockville came out against the high boy, and the high boy owner, whose name is escaping me, agreed to integrate. At the Heiser Theater, I want to say Alfred Heiser, I could be wrong, is his first name, but they refused to integrate and instead sold the theater so that they didn't have to.
Okay. Yeah, and again, we have so many questions. I'm not going to be able to get to all of them. You can certainly visit the Facebook page, and I'm sure there will be some great information there. I do have a lot of comments asking about a recording of this presentation. I will get that up tonight. You can certainly view that on our website at montgomeryhistory.org/mhconnected/watch. We'll have that up, and for those of you who have signed up for this talk, we send out an email newsletter on Monday with a link to that as well. Someone asks, let's see where I lost my question there. I apologize. Could you speak to how the experiences in Glen Echo were similar or different from other parks, such as Dorney Park in Lehigh Valley, Pennsylvania, which also incidentally has a Dentzel Carousel?
Wow, I don't know about the story of Dorney Park. I can't comment on it at all. I think that probably similar things about this, happened all over the country. And like I said before, what's so exciting and interesting to me about it is just how early it was and how unprecedented it was, and how, it was such a watershed for people to see Black and white people working together like this. And, it was basically an early victory for CORE and for the NAACP. Somebody asked me, the NAACP did actually get involved, although not at first. And because at first the NAACP, was not on the side of picketing as a form of protest. And Lawrence Henry, who was the unofficial spokesperson for the Nonviolent Action Group, went to the NAACP July 4th picnic that summer. So now it's the 5th day of the protests, and basically shamed everyone at the picnic, saying, like, look at you guys, like, why are you here at this, it was a horse show. Why are you here at this horse show instead of being a picketing? Do you realize that the picket line is half white and those people can get into the park? They don't need to be doing this. So why aren't you there? And at that point, the NAACP threw its full weight into being involved in the picketing, supporting the picketing, bringing busloads of people to the picketing. And in fact, it was almost always an NAACP lawyer that bailed everybody out of jail after they got arrested, because there was a lot of arrests. That first thing on the carousel was just the first wave. There was probably in the 50s by the time the pickets were over on September 11th.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit more about what happened to some of the picketers after this? Obviously, they led full lives, but are there any interesting stories there?
Yes, there are so many interesting stories. So many, in fact, that it took me several years before I could just settle on six people to choose from this whole collection whose stories basically lead the film. So the film is told through the point of view of 3 white and 3 Black protesters who each came from completely different backgrounds and motivations, and different things happened to them as a result. But I'm not going to give it away, but some of them became really illustrious leaders in the civil rights movement. There are tragic endings, there are rags to riches endings, but you're just going to have to see the movie.
Oh, terrible. All right. That's a good answer as a documentarian. Let's see, what became of the cooperative?
That's a great question. So Bannockburn still exists today. It's still a cooperative community, I think, on the books. And I know that the nursery school is still cooperative, and so is the clubhouse. I'm not sure if it's still if the swimming pool is still cooperative. And some people who were children at that time still live in Bannockburn and have raised their families there. people that I talk to say Bannockburn has changed. Certainly the real estate and the houses are far less modest than they were, but I can't really speak to how it runs.
Okay, so the next question I have, I'm going to kind of combine a couple of them. First of all, did the picketing have a noticeable or obvious effect on park attendance, and how did the picketing line end? What brought it to its conclusion?
That's a great question. The spokesperson for the owners, Leonard Warnoff, whenever he makes a comment in the papers, it's always like, this has not, our numbers have not in any way been affected by the picketing. I know that the park closed early that year, I think about a week and a half earlier than the season would normally end. So that indicates that the numbers were down. The picketing ended on September 11th because that was the last day of the season. That was when the park was closing for the year, and of course you weren't going to picket at a closed park. But I have beautiful pictures from that last day, and all of those people are carrying signs that say, "We'll be back next year as patrons or pickets," and they fully intended to just start right back up again next April when the park opened again.
Okay, so when was the park desegregated?
So the park opened, there was absolutely no statement at all from the owners or anything when the park closed, and not for months afterwards. On March 15th, there's a really small piece in the Washington Post that says Glen Echo to open on an integrated basis, something like Glen Echo to open to all patrons, I think. And March 30th was the first day of the season in 1961, and it opened integrated.
Okay, and again, I'm going to start wrapping up here because we are getting close to 8:45. And for those of you who have submitted questions that I didn't get to, I am so very sorry. There's just so many of them. But someone asks, what about Glen Echo residents? Did they also join in with the Bannockburn residents?
I'm sure there were a couple who did, but for the most part, Glen Echo, I'm just the facts are that the Glen Echo neighborhood was not in support of integrating the park.
Okay, and Ilana, can you remind us again when your target is to have this documentary finished?
I'm planning on having the documentary finished in June. With luck, it's a really complicated story. And I hope that it'll be, in festivals soon after that. And I'm hoping to have a local broadcaster that most of my films end up on PBS. I'm hoping that someplace like WETA or WHUT will be at the presenting station so that it can air on PBS.
Okay. And again, as we start to wrap things up, I just want to let everyone know, if you visit the glenechopark.org/carousel100, we do have Glen Echo has put together a recording, a video tour with a National Park Service ranger, Kevin Patty, of the carousel, and he goes into a bit more history of the actual carousel itself. So certainly check that out because it's a great video. And thanks to the National Endowment for a grant to help with the work with the National Park Service. I apologize. I'm just reading some notes from Katie there.
No. Can I reiterate
absolutely.
that? That's really important. Yeah, part of why we've gotten so far to begin with, besides a tremendous amount of generous donations, whose names who I would love to just reel off, but I won't. But we did get a grant early on from the National Endowment for the Arts, and then another one last year from the National Park Service African American Civil Rights Heritage Preservation Grant.
Okay. And again, everyone, I'm so sorry that I wasn't able to get to all the questions. We had just a tremendous amount of interaction here, and I hope I got to as many of the relevant questions as I can. Ilana, any closing thoughts as we wrap up? Any last words? That sounds terrible. Any final thoughts for the attendees here?
Yeah. When I started making this film, originally Obama was president, and it was sort of like a redemption story, right? And there was like a straight line almost from this picketing to the presidency. And then of course we had a completely different situation, and now we're in a different situation, and kind of one could look at the story of what happened at Glen Echo through these different lenses. And I think the story at this moment, based on this last election, is what is the power of mobilization, of real grassroots mobilization, of all these boots on the ground. And it's what happened at this election, and it's why Glen Echo was ultimately integrated. And I think that in that same way, this film is really all of our story. And so many people have become a part of it, either by volunteering, sending in their photographs, telling me their stories, and supporting the film financially. It just feels like a big community journey. So I would love for it to continue that. Please join the Facebook group so that I can keep you posted. And if you would like to make a tax-deductible donation, that's extraordinarily helpful too, because every little bit gets us a little bit farther. So thank you.
Okay, Katie, it looks like you want to wrap things up for us?
Sure. I just wanted to thank Ilana so much, and really excited about the project. I'm glad we've been able to help do some fundraising, and we're happy to steer gifts your way if they're sent to us, but we do want to see the project finished, so we're very excited. And we will also be making some clips available through our website as well, I'm sure. So anyway, thank you so much for this great work, and we're really lucky that you picked this topic and this park, because I know you're doing a fantastic job on this film.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Well, everyone, thank you so much for joining us on this Wednesday evening. And we'll look forward to seeing you again for another great program with Montgomery History next week, and then again with Glen Echo Park on the 14th. With that, we'll wrap things up, and everyone have a great evening. Thanks, Katie and Ilana.
Thank you.
Matt. Thank you, Montgomery History.